I want you to hold two things in your head at the same time. The Democratic Republic of Congo sits on an estimated $24 trillion worth of untapped minerals. Cobalt, coltan, gold, diamonds, uranium, the raw materials that your phone, your laptop, every single electric car battery on the planet depends on. The DRC alone holds around 70% of the world's cobalt reserve, and the average Congolese person earns less than $600 a year. Nigeria pumps roughly 1.5 million barrels of oil every single day. Angola has been producing oil since the 1950s. Zambia has some of the richest copper deposits on earth. Botswana has diamonds. South Africa has gold, platinum, chrome. The continent holds about 30% of the world's mineral reserves, 40% of its gold, and 10% of its oil. And Africa is the poorest continent on earth. That is not a coincidence. That is not bad luck. And I want to say this clearly before we go any further. It is not and has never been anything about the people. This is not a story about Africa failing. This is a story about a system that was built to make Africa fail. And today I want to walk you through exactly how that system works, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. In 1884, representatives of 14 European nations gathered in Berlin. Over a few months, they sat around a table and drew lines on a map, dividing the entire continent among themselves. Britain, France, Belgium, Portugal, Germany, each walked away with a piece, and those lines, drawn in a conference room in Berlin, became the national borders of Africa that we still have today. The people drawing those lines had almost no idea what was on the other side of them. The British Prime Minister at the time put it plainly, "We have been drawn lines upon maps where no white man's feet ever trod, who have been giving away mountains, rivers, and lakes to each other, only hindered by the small impediment that we never knew exactly where the mountains, rivers, and lakes were." 80% of the borders they drew followed straight latitude and longitude lines, because when you are drawing borders on a map in an European office, you just use a ruler. Now, Africa was not empty. There were 825 documented ethnic groups living across the continent, each with their own territories, languages, and communities. In a study published in the American Economic Review in 2016, tracked exactly where each of these groups lived before colonization, and then overlaid the colonial borders on top. The results were devastating. 229 ethnic groups, about 27% of all African groups, had their ancestral homeland split across 2 or more countries. The Hausa between Nigeria and Niger, the Iwi between Ghana and Togo. The Somali people were split across 5 separate colonial territories, which is why there is a 5-pointed star on Somalia's national flag to this day, representing 5 pieces of one nation scattered by one conference. And what did that do? Conflict intensify in the homelands of split ethnic groups is 57% higher than in non-split areas. Those groups are 12 percentage points more likely to have participated in ethnic civil wars since independence. When a government discriminates against a group that has co-ethnics across borders, and they do because a group with a cross-border connection is a genuine military threat, those co-ethnics provide weapon, shelter, and soldiers. Neighboring countries use split groups as tools to destabilize each other. The border that a European drew with a ruler in 1885 is still generating conflict till this day, and a continent constantly at war with itself cannot build the institutions it needs to turn its resources into development. The economists Acemoglu, Johnson, and Robinson published what is probably the most influential paper in development economics over the last 30 years. And the question they were trying to answer was simple: why are some countries rich and the other poor? Their answer was institutions, but more specifically, what type of institutions colonizer built and why. And the answer comes down to one variable: could Europeans safely live there? Where Europeans could settle, North America, Australia, New Zealand, they built institutions that protected property rights, constrained government power, and gave settlers representation, because they were building those institutions for themselves. But in West Africa, Central Africa, most of Sub-Saharan Africa, European mortality in the first year of arrival reached 46 to 72%. Under those conditions, you cannot build a settled colony, so instead, you built an extractive state, a lean, brutal apparatus designed to do one thing: transfer as much of the colony's resources to Europe as efficiently as possible. No property rights for locals, no constraints on government power, no investment in local welfare, education, or industry. France extracted 50% of GDP from Dahomey between 1905 and 1914. Tax rates in Tunisia under French rule were 4 times higher than in France itself. Britain extracted £2.4 million in taxes from northern Rhodesia copper belt in 1 decade. Railway lines were built from mines to ports, not to connect African communities to each other, but to get resources out faster. And then independence came. And here where the paradox really locks in, because when African states became independent, they inherited the extractive state intact, the same machinery, the same structures, the same legal frameworks designed to extract, not develop. Crawford Young, a political scientist who spent decades studying for African states, wrote that although we call them new states, they were successors to the colonial regime, inheriting its structures, its quotidian routines and practices, and its more hidden normative theories of governance. And now we get to the third layer of the paradox, and this is the part that I find most counterintuitive, because even with bad institutions and fragile states, we might expect resource wealth to help at least a little. More money coming in should mean more money for the people. Right? Wrong. A paper published in the Journal of Development Economics in 2006 did something the entire resource-cursed literature had failed to do before. It put an explicitly political model of what politicians actually do when resource rents arrive. And the finding is devastating in its simplicity. When a politician controls a resource, oil, copper, diamonds, and those resources generate rents that flows to the government first, the politician's rational strategy is to use them to stay in power. And the most effective way to stay in power is patronage. Give people government jobs not because those jobs produce anything, but because a government worker has a personal, material stake in keeping you in office. And the evidence for this is everywhere. Nigeria's oil boom in 1973. Every sector of the Nigerian economy contracted except government. In Trinidad and Tobago, government employment reached 50% of all formal employment at the peak of the oil boom. In Zambia, copper-dependent Zambia grew its public sector at 7.2% a year between 1966 and 1980. Private employment contracted by 6.2% per year over the same period. The copper wealth was real, the collapse was political. And here is what makes it a true curse. This dynamic operates under dictatorship, under democracies, under military regimes. What matters is whether the institutions governing public sector hiring are meritocratic or politicized. In countries built on colonial extractive frameworks, a minister can hang out government jobs to his clients, and every resource boom becomes a patronage boom, and the country gets poorer even as it earns more. But none of these papers, none of these models, none of this theory fully communicates what this actually costs in human terms. So let me try. Zambia became independent in 1964 with a GDP per capita comparable to South Korea's. By 1990, it was among the lowest in the world. The copper rent was real. What happened to them is exactly what the model predicts. They became the fuel for a political machine. Kenneth Kundra banned all other parties in 1972 and built a system where employment and power flowed along party lines. By 1985, his party had filled over 40,000 local offices in Lusaka alone. The copper money fed the machine. When copper prices collapsed, there was nothing left. Or look at the Niger Delta in Nigeria. The Delta generates most of Nigeria's oil wealth. The Delta communities have some of the worst poverty, highest infant mortality, and most severe environmental destruction in the country. Because the oil does not belong to the communities sitting on top of it. It belongs to the state. And the state had been using it to feed a patronage network for 50 years. The people who lived among the pipelines, who breathed the gas flares, whose fishing grounds has been destroyed, they have seen almost nothing. The DRC $24 trillion in the ground. A child in Katanga province will grow up mining cobalt with his bare hands for less than $2 a day, and that cobalt will end up in a battery in a car sold in Europe or America for $60,000. And the system connecting those 2 points was designed layer by layer over more than a century by people who understood exactly what they were building. Africa does not have a resource problem, it has a system problem. A system built in European conference rooms, maintained by extractive states, and operated by political machines that convert resource wealth into power rather than prosperity. Norway has oil, Botswana has diamonds. The difference between them in Nigeria and the DRC is not the resource. It is what was built around the resource. Norway built institutional walls between oil money and political patronage before the boom. Botswana did too before the diamond money arrived. Most of Africa was never given that chance. It was handed an extractive state, a broken map, and told to develop. The paradox is not a mystery, it is a design.